said that the footage that was shot originally in Chico with Olivia de Havilland in Bidwell Park, she reminded him of a leading lady in like some sort of high school Shakespeare play. He said that she was going way too elegant on them. So they did not like a lot of what Keeley had done. Now, they were in Busch Gardens shooting the archery tournament. A little bit about the archery tournament. The extras playing archers in the scene were inexperienced, did not know how to shoot bows and arrows, so they were eventually given arrows with soft rubber tips. One of the stuntmen, Buster Wiles, who was at the Busch Gardens filming of the archery tournament, had this to say. The publicity department released the story that Howard Hill, had actually split the arrow in the famous tournament sequence, filmed at Busch Gardens in Pasadena. But as great as Howard was, the publicity story was off the mark by a long shot. Howard was indeed able to strike another arrow, but the notch deflected a direct split and it didn't photograph. A wire was rigged in front of the administration building, and I fired the arrow. Buster Wiles fired the arrow down a wire. Now it can be revealed that Buster Wiles split the arrow. And one columnist noted how amusing it was to hear the conversations of Prince John's mounted men-at-arms and knights. These Norman warriors speak with Texas drawls. They're mostly ex-cowpunchers, now members of the Hollywood Writers Actors Association. So all of these very noble Englishmen were actually...
Yeah, these guys riding horses. Where did they get them?
Exactly.
Get cowboys. That makes sense.
Hal Wallace, who was the producer, did not like Keeley's direction. He wrote to Keeley on November 1st, talking about the rushes of Olivia de Havilland in the following way. She seems to have gone elegant on us, and the reading of her lines is reminiscent of the leading lady in high school plays. None of the executives at the studio were pleased with the pace of the film or the action sequences that Keeley shot. Even sending a second unit director, B. Reeves Breezy Eason, to help speed things along did not help. At the end of November, Keeley was replaced with studio stalwart, Hungarian-born Michael Curtiz. And Wallace needed someone that would bring majesty and energy to each of the scenes, and he felt Curtiz could do just that. Unfortunately, the action sequences were not effective. Wallace explained, and I had to replace the director in mid-production, an unheard of event at the time. I felt that only Mike Curtiz could give the picture the color and scope it needed. The reason we hadn't used him in the first place was because Errol had begged us not to. According to Wallace, Flynn much preferred the elegant and civilized Keeley to the hard-fisted, hot-headed Curtiz, which I said. And this is a practice that happened actually in several productions from 1938, specifically with George Cukor and Victor Fleming, because directors such as William Keighley and George Cukor were very civilized, they were very sophisticated, they were very soft-spoken, they moved at very slow paces, which were not great in the case of The Adventures of Robin Hood for an action film. Keighley was not doing what Hal B. Wallace wanted him to, so he replaced him with Michael Curtiz. And Michael Curtiz, he directed melodramas, he directed Technicolor musicals, he directed action pictures, he directed comedies, he could really do anything. Fay Wray, who was the scream queen of a lot of movies from the 1930s, she said he was not crude or rude, but I felt that he was not flesh and bones, that he was part of the steel of the camera. So he was very much involved in moving the picture along as fast as he could in the best way that he possibly could. And George Cukor had started out as director on Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, and was replaced in both circumstances with Victor Fleming, because Victor Fleming was like Michael Curtiz. He was like, we're going to get this moved along as fast as we can. No matter who gets killed in the process, we're going to get it finished. Curtiz had been a very important Hungarian film director in the 1920s, and he was invited by Warner Brothers to come out and direct for them in 1926, but it wasn't until 1935 that he directed Captain Blood, and that was his first big successful film at the studio. And from then on, he directed bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and more successful films. And so by 1938, they put him on Adventures of Robin Hood, and they immediately gave him a raise because he churned out the film so quickly. So Flynn said of Curtiz, I was to spend 5 miserable years with him making Robin Hood, Charge of the Light Brigade, and many other films. In each, he tried to make the scenes all so realistic that my skin didn't seem to matter to him. Nothing delighted him more than real bloodshed. And Olivia de Havilland said of him, he was caustic critical. He was furious when you took an hour for lunch. You didn't take an hour for lunch with him. You took 45 minutes. 40 minutes was about all you took, because you would have to take off your costume And then you would have to go in to eat something, and then you would have to come back and get your makeup fixed, then you'd have to put on your costume, and they were usually complicated, and you'd have to be ready for work. If instead of being 10 minutes ahead of time, you were ready on the dot. He was enraged and sulked all afternoon. And director Vincent Sherman said of him, his whole life was his pictures. I never heard of Mike having a personal or social relationship that mattered to him. Except in the 1920s, when he was a film director in Europe, there was a certain film starlet that he had an affair with, that he made several films with, named Lily Demita. So that was another problem that he and Flynn had. I know, for everybody listening, Dearest Eyes just got really big. Oh, the shock factor of that.
That's not good.
No, it's not
good.
So Flynn was a devil-may-care who took nothing seriously, whilst Curtiz was a consummate professional who put everything he had into making his films. Curtiz was very meticulous and was enraptured by making shots compositionally perfect with lots of props and details, which concerned Hal Wallis. Well, and Hal Wallis was concerned that he was going to spend too much time using props as characters, which he did, because he threw every single prop. Sir Guy got thrown into the candelabra, and there was all sorts of stunts going on, and he was afraid that Curtiz was going to go overboard on that, so that was going to even go more over budget, which it didn't. But it turned into a kind of a grueling production schedule once Curtiz got put on it.
Yeah.
Because he was like, okay, we're going to get this film finished, so we're going to shoot for like 18 hours a day. Curtiz started shooting first week of December on the Nottingham Castle set. And the Nottingham Castle set was reportedly one of the largest indoor film sets ever constructed at the time. And it measured 300 by 200 feet. All of the stone walls were like plaster and cardboard. And the doors were apparently so light that they would just randomly swing open by themselves. They weren't the giant heavy doors. But not only did Curtiz shoot all of the indoor scenes in Nottingham Castle, he reshot some of the outdoor scenes that were originally shot in Bidwell Park. He took the cast and crew to Sherwood Forest, which was in San Fernando Valley. There is actually a Sherwood Forest, and it was named Sherwood Forest because Douglas Fairbanks shot his 1922 Robin Hood in Sherwood Forest. Fred Cavins was brought in to train all actors in the art of fencing. Belgian-born Cavins trained Flynn and Rathbone during filming of Captain Blood, and for several weeks before Robin Hood began shooting, he worked with 24 hand-picked men, rehearsing with broadswords and quarterstaffs on Stage 1 at Warner Brothers. Cavins was a graduate of the Belgian Military Institute, where he was a professor of fencing at age 21. He started working as a sword fencing trainer, an instructor in Hollywood during the Silent Age. He's known as being the chief influence in bringing style and technique to Hollywood screen duels. So in the documentary I was watching on the Robin Hood Blu-ray, before Fred Cavins, if you watch the original Robin Hood with Douglas Fairbanks, men were just in screen duels, they were flailing around swords like they had, their pants unzipped.
Like no drama to it, right? It's just kind of like...
No. They're just waving
their
swords back and forth.
Yeah.
So Fred Cavins was known as being the chief influence in bringing style and technique to Hollywood screen duels. Cavins thought that the movements during theatrical swordplay should be broad and magnified, unlike movements in competitive fencing, which should be as small and precise as possible. The duel should be a fight and not a fencing exhibition, and should disregard at times classically correct guards and lunges. He believed that on film, the natural fighting instinct should come through as the dominant factor. When this occurs, he said the whole performance will leave an impression of strength, skill, and natural grace. In the finished film, liberties were taken with technique in relation to historic time period. The medieval broad blades used in the movie were very heavy and hacking weapons, and the elegant fencing techniques incorporated by Cavins weren't developed until centuries later. So, like I said, the techniques that he used were not exactly...
That's interesting. Accurate. When I took single sword, that was something we talked about, because one of the things they said was, if you go too fast, it's not interesting, because you're missing all of the movements and the drama of the movement. And that's why it's so big and so performative in some ways, because it's the goal is to tell a story. And like with the fencing, like he says, you keep it all right in front of you, in tight little movements. That's interesting.
Okay, so Flynn did not have the patience to study with Cavins regularly, but he was a quick study. He was very athletic, so he picked it up pretty quickly, but he wasn't great at it. Basil Rathbone loved it. He started studying with Fred Cavins during Captain Blood, became obsessed with it, so by the time Robin Hood was made, he was very well learned in the area of fencing.
That makes me want to go back and watch it, because I wonder if, knowing that, if there's places you can pick up where Basil is carrying the fight. I mean, obviously Errol Flynn was good at it. He did it all the time moving forward. Obviously Basil took a little bit more pride in the skill of it, it sounds like. I just wonder if there's places you can tell where, he's carrying this movement. Probably
even though Basil dies.
Yeah, even though he dies.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing. So Rathbone's stunt double, Fred Graham, had just come off MGM's Mutiny on the Bounty, where he worked as Clark Gable's stunt double. And when Robin Hood kills Sir Guy, and Sir Guy falls off the staircase, to his death, his stunt double, Fred Graham, fell off the staircase and broke his ankle. When he landed. And also, Flynn boasted in his memoirs that he did all of his own stunts, but Buster Wiles and also another stunt double, Don Turner, were used in some of the sword fight scenes with Sir Guy. So, after more than 4 months of filming, the production finally closed on January 14th, 1938. Second unit director Al, I think it's Aylborn, reported it was a long day, over 18 continuous hours of shooting. Curtiz called company at 8:30 a.m., and they finished shooting at 3:10 a.m. the morning after. After finally wrapping, the film was 38 days over schedule and significantly over budget, and it was the most expensive film Warner Brothers had ever produced at the time. Now, after film was wrapped, they made a rough cut of it. And Hal B. Wallace always said, you watch a Hal B. Wallace film, the music is always going to be classical. And they usually used Max Steiner, who wrote the score to many Bette Davis films. He wrote the score to Gone with the Wind. He wrote the score to Casablanca. But he was not available at the time because he was pretty much the studio workhorse. He worked on project to project to project. In 1934, Hal B. Wallace was at the castle of Max Reinhardt, the producer that produced Midsummer Night's Dream, and the directed the film version near Salzburg. And they were in the process of bringing Midsummer Night's Dream to the screen. So that's why Wallace was in Salzburg at Reinhardt's castle. And Eric Wolfgang Korngold, who wrote the music to Robin Hood, which is gorgeous. If you haven't listened to the score, go listen to the score, was there, and he played the piano. And Wallace said, it was unforgettable music of concert quality. I was impressed with his genius. And then Wallace invited Korngold to come and compose the music for Midsummer Night's Dream, which was just really an adaptation of Felix Mendelssohn's music. So after this, Korngold received an Oscar nomination for his work on Captain Blood, and he won in 1937 for Anthony Adverse. And in January of 1938, Hal B. Wallace sent a telegram to Eric Wolfgang Korngold, who was in Austria working on his opera Die Catherine, I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it, but he was working on an opera that was about to premiere that he had written. Wallace said, would you please come back to Hollywood in the next 10 days and compose the score for The Adventures of Robin Hood? And so Korngold, who liked Wallace, put off his opera, the premiere of his opera, from January 1938 to the fall of 1938. And he traveled with his wife he left his son behind, but he traveled with his wife to the United States of America, to Hollywood. And it was apparently a very long trip because the Nazis were slowly taking over Europe at that time. And they got to Hollywood. Korngold watched a rough cut of the film. And then he hand-delivered this letter to Wallace after he saw it. He said, I'm sincerely sorry to have to bother you once more. I do appreciate deeply your kindness and courtesy toward me, and I am aware of the fact that you have made all concessions possible to facilitate my work. But please believe a desperate man who has to be true to himself and to you, a man who knows what he can do and what he cannot do. Robin Hood is no picture for me. I have no relation to it and therefore cannot produce any music for it. I am a musician of the heart, of passions and psychology. I am not a musical illustrator of a 90% action picture. Therefore, let me say no, definitely, and let me say it today when no time has been lost for you as yet, since the work print will not be ready until tomorrow. And please do not try to make me change my mind. My resolve is unshakable. I implore you not to be angry with me and not to deprive me of your friendship. So the next day, after Korngold hand delivered